Exodus. Exodus is a Greek word which means to exit. Exit. To depart or go out. That's what the word means, to exit. That's a Greek word. The Hebrew word for it is yatsa. Yatsa, which means basically the same thing. To go or to bring out. It means to depart from or to go forward. It means to proceed to or toward something. You can see all this about moving out of something and heading to another thing. Moving out of and going to. Exiting from and heading to. Or departing towards. So there is that aspect of going out. Going out. Exodus. The children of Israel had to exodus Egypt. They left into the wilderness. And of course, it is going forth with the purpose or for result. It's not meandering or loitering. All right, so the word Exodus is drawn from chapter 19. I found this very interesting. All the way in chapter 19 is where this word is actually drawn from. So this is where we get the title of that book from. Verse 19. In the third month, after the children of Israel had gone out, Exodus, Yatsa. You see? So this is where we begin now to see where the naming of this book comes from. After they, in the third month, after they had Yatsa, they had gone out of the land of Egypt, on the same day, they came to the wilderness of Sinai. For they had departed from. You see those words? Gone out, departed from. Exodus. They had exodus, Rephidim, and they were now heading into the wilderness of Sinai. So for they had departed from Rephidim, had come to the wilderness of Sinai, and camped in the wilderness. That word also, camping, is a word that will still touch towards the end again, and see that there is a camping that was decisive. There is a camping that concluded this journey. We will talk about a bit of camping towards the end. So Israel camped there before the mountain for a long time actually, and we'll be able to see that. Exodus is the record of Israel's birth as a nation. This is a record of Israel's birth as a nation. So when you talk about Exodus, we are talking about the birthing of these people as a nation, according to the prophecy he gave to Abraham. Within the protective womb of Egypt, the Jewish family of 70 rapidly multiplied. A family of 70 people rapidly multiplied into millions. Imagine that. Just from 70. Yeah. Verse 27 of Genesis 46. With the two sons who had been born to Joseph in Egypt, the members of Jacob's family, which went to Egypt, were 70 in all. Now, I want you to remember that these people left Canaan. God gave Canaan to Abraham. These people left Canaan. They went to Egypt. Yes, because that means by the time they need to come back to Canaan, there are Anakites there. But God had promised that this is your land. So even if you've been away for 400 years, it's your land. So remember that. Yeah, they are coming from Canaan, going to Egypt, and then coming back. All right? But the beautiful thing is, they went as individuals, they went as a family, they went as a divided family. They went as a result of sin, trying to kill their brother. And they came back in glory, in conquest, in power, in authority. There are places you and I may go in weakness, but you come back in strength. And this is the thing. We want to journey with God that way. That as we begin the journey with God, we are starting in weakness. We are actually being housed. In Goshen, they were being helped. They were being fed. Yeah, but by the time they came back, They were a mighty nation. A mighty nation that could do great things. But the point here is, there were 70 people. Those are the people who went to Egypt. 70 of them. But of course, you know, the people who came out of there were over 2 million. At least, the smallest number we would probably talk about is maybe 70 million. Isn't it? And therefore, you can see that it is something that that is worth noting. 70 million people came back. At the right time, accompanied with severe birth pains, an infant nation numbering between 2 and 3 million people. That nation is brought into the world as a nation. They went as a family, one family actually, and they came back as a nation. They went as a family, but they came out as a nation. It is the second among the 5 books. Exodus, of course, is second among the 5 books of Moses. We talked about that last week. And we said these books are called the Pentateuch. And that these are books that are given authorship or have been agreed that they were authored by Moses. And that gives us the story of how God formed the nation of Israel to play a special role in his plans for the whole world. But it's always good to get the context of things, you know, connect this with that. And that is what allows us to be richer. We get richer not just by the letter of the law, but by understanding even the spirit behind that letter. And even understanding the context. Right? So God has brought these people because he must form them into his nation. A nation for himself. But they have been slaves. They have been slaves for hundreds of years. So they are only slaves. And that means he will have to do things to change them from slaves to princes. That is not a small task. Right? So that's why you have to even give them laws. You know, some guidelines. How are you going to walk with me? Remember, he even began by describing or defining or introducing himself to Moses. Moses appears, he sees a burning bush, and as he's drawing near, the Lord tells him, remove your shoes, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. That was the start. That was the starting point of this journey. Moses is running away, you know. He killed somebody in Egypt. Of course, you know the story of Moses. So he ran away to Jethro's place. He's been there for 40 years taking care of sheep. Now God wants to send him back. This guy is 80. God wants to send him back to the same place. And we know the story of how, Moses had to be rescued, by his sister, Miriam, who, and all that and all that. So when God visits you, he visits you in his terms. Yeah. So he journeyed with them to Canaan through many hardships, delays. That was part of the technology. So God used a tool called delay to shape Israel. And God still does use such a tool to shape you and me. Delay. And delay is not necessarily denial. Delay. Certain things we may want from God now will not come because he uses an instrument called delay. And normally delay shapes character. Delay shapes character. Delay teaches us patience. Delay teaches us to wait. And in the process of waiting, character forms. Character forms. He used testings. Testing strengthens us. Because when you fail a test, you go and work harder, even in a normal environment. So testings strengthen us. Testings make us know that, well, I can fail, but that's not the end of life. So he used delays and testings meant to deal with their rebellion. You see, God knows these guys have a rebellious heart. So what I'm going to do, I am going to test them. I am going to delay them. I am going to expose them to many hardships. I'm going to break that thing in them, that ego they have, a very strong one. I'm going to break it until they surrender to me. And sometimes God does that with us. Yeah? Sometimes God does that with us. So the book deals mainly with the locations where they camped and what happened at each location. It's interesting. This is literally a book on a journey. At this place, we did this. At this place, we did this. At this place, this happened. That's the story of Exodus. You know, places and what happened. Places and what happened. Some bad things, some good things. Places and what happened. So the book deals mainly with the locations where they camped and what happened at each location. It's literally a book on a journey. The key location, of course, is Sinai. So if you talk about what is the key location in Exodus, Sinai. And even for us, that is the one we remember more. The 10 Commandments. Moses climbing the mountain and it is smoking with fire. He disappears there to reappear 40 days later. No food, no drink. You know. And then he finds that people have already changed their mind and they have been led by Aaron to sacrifice, to take a calf, a golden calf, and made them their God and say, here are the gods that brought you out of Egypt, O Israel. Moses broke the commandments before they started keeping them. He is so angry, he broke those 2 tablets. He was so mad. He broke the commandments before he could even tell them how to keep them. So Sinai is memorable, right? So, and the second part, so the key location is Sinai, and the second part of Exodus, the whole of Leviticus, and the beginning of Numbers, the other books of Moses, describe what took place there. Can you imagine how many chapters and I've not counted the number of chapters that have been exclusively given to Sinai. Yeah? The second part of Exodus, the whole of Leviticus, the beginning part of Numbers is just about Sinai. That means that place, like Abraham in Genesis, you remember? Yeah, we saw that Abraham had what? 34, was it 34 chapters with him and his descendants. Yeah? In fact, it talked about a king who did not know Joseph. This doesn't necessarily mean that he had never heard of Joseph and all that. It simply means he did not recognize Joseph and whatever Joseph represented. A new order that did not represent the order represented by Joseph. Remember, we've said Joseph is a type of Christ. A new king who didn't recognize that came to power. So you can only expect these people were actually going to suffer. They had to. There was no chance or no choice, but they were actually going to suffer because a new king has come. All right? In the book of Genesis, Egypt is a picture of heaven, the place of supply and resource, where Joseph, a type of Christ, rules at Pharaoh's right hand. Okay? Goshen was originally the best land. That's why they went there. Joseph is in power until a new king arose. And sometimes it's good to know at what point a new king arises, because the moment a new king who does not recognize Joseph comes to power, then you can only expect bondage, slavery, oppression. So Goshen was originally the best land, but now it has become a place of limitation. And that is true. There is a level of revelation you may have walked with this far, but that place, that revelation, maybe has already become a place of limitation. The moment we begin to talk about newness, you know, the moment you hear newness, God is moving, grace is changing address. When those words begin to be talked, then it tells you that maybe it's time I moved out of where I am, because it is a place of limitation. That's why even Joshua, we are looking at Micah 4:1-2, and we saw how Joshua was dressed in filthy clothes. Now that when God moves, if you don't move, you enter into bondage. Anytime God moves, if you don't move, you enter into a place of restriction, legalism, limitation, oppression. That's why you can even see a vibrant church that is very current with what God is doing. But for some reason, they get to a place and they come to a plain, and they plateau there. And the moment that happens, you begin now to hear of bondage. Maybe the pastor is oppressing the people. The people are oppressing each other. There is too much rules and too many regulations. Don't do this. A place that was free and happy now becomes a place that is highly restricted or restrictive, highly oppressive. A place where people are rejoicing and they had liberty in the Lord. A place where people could worship God. Now it's like a dead place. So there needs to be a constant move forward into new positions, or else we fall into the same trap as the Israelites. The moment you don't move forward, you fall into the same trap. The place was a beautiful place. Maybe they became too comfortable and forgot God. And actually, it looks like that was the problem God had. They started just worshiping idols there. They forgot God. And God's jealousy rose up, and he had to come and do something. So there needs to be a constant move forward into new positions, or else we fall into the same trap as the Israelites. So this is an issue of bondage. Let me take a few moments and talk a little bit about characteristics of bondage. Characteristics of bondage. And I feel this is something that really, really needs to land in our hearts. So these people go to Goshen, a place of freedom and joy and peace and prosperity actually. But later, something shifts. When there is a shift in the spirit, when there is a shift in the spirit, the shift in the order of governance. Remember the day of Daniel, when he was praying, but the prince of Persia couldn't allow the prayers to arrive. So it will destroy your faith. I worship God like this. That might become your place of bondage. Because God could be saying, now dance, me, I worship God like this. That becomes your bondage. And bondage destroys faith. So the moment you enter there, then your faith will actually be destroyed. Bondage denies the power of God. Bondage, it denies the power of God. So even when God is doing something, you won't believe it. No, it's not God. This is science. This is so and so. This is what? You will associate what happened to you to anything else except God. It denies the power of God. That's bondage. That's bondage. And many times, a lot of logic is based on bondage. The bondage of the earthly nature. It prevents you accessing his promises. It prevents you. It destroys. Because you can imagine, actually once your faith is destroyed, how do you access the promises of God? Because we access the promises of God by faith. Once faith is destroyed, well, I'm bound. I'm bound. Bondage produces fear. You can't have confidence. You're not very confident. We are full of fear. That's the nature of bondage. Full of fear. So bondage produces fear and traps you in the earthly realm. The Bible says I think it's 2 Timothy 2:7 or 1:7 that God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, of love, and a sound mind. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, of love, and a sound mind. In Romans 8:15 says, for you did not receive a spirit that makes you a slave again to fear. Right now there are so many people who are living in fear of tomorrow. Yeah, they are slaves of depravity, but they are promising other people freedom. For a man is a slave to whatever has mastered him. A man is a slave. Anything that masters you, you are a slave to it. That's why we say we are born slaves. Born, willing slaves of Christ. Alright? Let me use this word here. The house of bondage. The house of bondage. Bondage is a lifestyle. Let's try to describe that house. House of bondage. Bondage is a lifestyle. Exodus 13 verse 3. Moses said to the people, remember this day in which you went out of Egypt. Out of the house of bondage. You see? So Moses is defining something called the house of bondage that existed in Egypt. You went out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. So this is a descriptive for the life in Egypt. You know, house of bondage. So the lifestyle they had in Egypt is a house of bondage. It was a house of bondage. For by strength of hand, the Lord brought you out of this place. No leavened bread shall be eaten. Now, a house of bondage highlights two things. Firstly, a lifestyle. Homes are a sign and a result of our lifestyle. So when you say a house of bondage, it's a place where the lifestyle is a lifestyle of bondage. This is where there is overindulgence. This is where sin reigns supreme. This is where everybody does whatever they want because there is no government. There is no law. It's a house of bondage. They call it freedom, but it is bondage. We are of the household of God. You see, another thing, household of God, which implies more than a dwelling place, but a community with particular traits and characteristics. Right? So when you use the word house, you're actually referring to a place where there is a certain kind of a lifestyle. Secondly, a house suggests rigidity and a regimented lifestyle that cannot be directed by God. Contrast with a tent. If you compare a house and a tent, there's a very big difference. A house is rigid, it is permanent, you can't move it. You know, you have to bring it down and build again. A tent, you pitch it, and then you unpitch it and go. That's why Abraham lived in tents. Because he was actually illustrating for us how life should be. Highly flexible. Pitch the tent today, remove it tomorrow and move on. We are on a journey. Life is a journey. A house is fixed and permanent. This was Paul's cry over the law and legalistic mentalities. So these guys are fixed within a house of bondage. The law became a house of bondage to the Jews. And such positions produced bondage. Such positions produced bondage. Galatians 2:3. Yet not even Titus. This is Paul talking about him going to Jerusalem, carrying a young man called Titus, whose father was a Greek. Yet not even Titus, who was with me, was compelled to be circumcised. Paul is going to compare notes with Peter and the other apostles because he has gotten a new revelation and he's trying to check to see whether he is fine. It's always good to check whether you're in the faith. Check with other people to know whether things that you're beginning to call revelation are